This report is essentially a catalog of the 400 plus changes the administration has made to immigration during their time in office. We started to keep this list internally at the beginning of the administration because they were making changes at such a rapid fire pace, and some of them were very small and very technical. And this list inside MPI ended up being a really helpful resource. So we decided to publish it and to put it out there so it can be a resource for everyone else. And one of the benefits of having all of these changes, kind of tightly packed into the pages of this report is it helps you see some of the trends with this administration's agenda on immigration. For example, many of the changes reflect the administration's really strong knowledge of immigration law and regulations and their willingness to enforce things that have been on the books for years but never been implemented. One example of this is they've put into force a 1996 law that has allowed ICE to begin levying fees of up to $799 per day for unauthorized immigrants who remain in the country in violation of a removal order. So it seems like a really small and technical changes, but when you take these all together, it has added up to a really monumental change and evolution of our immigration system. One example of a technical change they made that has actually has potential to be alone make very big changes to the system is public charge. This has gotten a lot of news, so you may have heard of it, but it's a restriction that's been on the books since the very beginnings of our immigration system, but really rarely implemented. In public charge restricts individuals from coming into the United States if the government determines that that individual is likely to be reliant on public benefits when they get to the country. And the Trump administration has really expanded the definition of who would fall under this restriction. Its implementation has been rocky due to legal setbacks, but once implemented and really enforced, it could significantly change the flows into the United States, disfavoring women, the elderly, and nationals in Central America and Mexico. So overall, looking at this report, the really broad changes that have been implemented by the administration would include closing off humanitarian benefits, sealing the southern border, making life in the interior really uncomfortable for immigrants, both legal and unauthorized immigrants inside the United States, and reducing legal immigration into the country. And the pandemic has only accelerated the changes that this administration has made. I'd say there are three changes that have really been kind of the biggest that this administration has made during the pandemic. The first is a CDC order. The second would be the April 22nd presidential proclamation restricting immigration, permanent immigration into the country, and then the June 22nd proclamation restricting temporary workers. So I'll talk for the rest of my time about each of those and the implications for those. So the CDC order is another great example of this administration diving into the laws on the books and finding things that have never been enforced before, but can be used to really restrict immigration into the country. There was a 1944 law that allows the Surgeon General to restrict the entry of individuals deemed a public health threat. So the administration used that law to and issued an order coming from the CDC director that restricts the entry of individuals that are not authorized to enter the country. The effect of that has been essentially ending asylum at the southern border, and that's actually something the administration has been working on for years. We have many, many policies that have come down over the prior 3 years that really restrict asylum at the southern border with the goal of really just having no one enter there. But in one movement with the CDC order, they've really accomplished that goal. As a result of this order, asylum seekers, the vast majority of them, are being expelled from the southern border. We don't know a lot, unfortunately, about the procedures under which they're being expelled, and there are a few who are still being let into the country to in theory apply for asylum, and we don't know a lot about who's chosen and why, unfortunately. But in all, that CDC order has really completely dismantled asylum at the southern border. So the second big change that I referenced was the April 22nd proclamation. This proclamation is interesting because the president issued it not justifying this major immigration change with the public health crisis, but rather with the economic crisis, saying that he is restricting permanent immigration into the country in order to protect U.S. nationals on the job market and in the economy. What that April 22nd proclamation does is end immigration into the country in several categories, many family-based categories, including, for example, parents of U.S. citizens, siblings of U.S. citizens, spouses and children of legal permanent residents. But it also restricts the entry of anyone applying from outside of the country for the diversity visa lottery. And the effect of that proclamation actually accomplishes something that the administration previously tried to push Congress to do, which was they tried to get Congress several times to end the diversity visa lottery and to significantly reduce family-based migration, which they have labeled chain migration. So in one move, under the opening given to them by the pandemic, they've accomplished something on immigration that previously all of us would have thought they would need congressional cooperation to do. Then last, there's that June 22nd proclamation, which significantly, which restricts temporary workers coming into the country in major non-immigrant categories. The H-1B visa is the most common visa for skilled workers coming into the country. That has been restricted. They've also restricted J's, L's, and H-2Bs, which are a little more niche, but still major categories for temporary workers coming into the United States. Now, anyone applying for those to come into the United States on those categories, if they're applying from outside of the country, they're restricted from doing so. And this, again, like the other provisions, accomplishes something the administration was already working towards prior to the pandemic. They had significantly increased scrutiny of applications of temporary workers, especially the H-1B visa. And now with this one movement, they've significantly reduced that flow. And then I'd be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we still have travel bans in place for foreign nationals traveling from 31 countries. And as with many of these procedures, it's kind of hard to see an end in sight, not only because the pandemic is still raging in the United States, it's still a very present problem, but also because these provisions accomplish things on immigration that the administration was working towards for a long time, for years before. It's hard to imagine them walking these back willingly, even once the pandemic is no longer a prevalent issue. We don't have transparency from the administration on how exactly they're implementing the CDC's order at the southern border. We do have leaked instruction to CBP officers that show no consideration for people who are interested in applying for asylum. Instead, if migrants who are apprehended in between ports of entry or who approach ports of entry without authorization to enter the country, if they proactively say that they have a fear of torture in their home country, not a fear of persecution, just a fear of torture, then they may have a chance of applying for humanitarian benefits in the United States. We know that there are a few people that are still being permitted to apply for asylum, but we don't know why. We don't know who these few people are, or why the administration is not applying the CDC order to them. These can't be walked back by a future administration, and nearly every change under President Trump has been issued by executive fiat, right? It's been an administrative change. It hasn't gone through Congress, which does make it simpler for a future, more immigrant-friendly administration to reverse them. But the reality is that they were done at a very rapid-fire pace, and no Democratic administration would have the time or resources or political willingness to spend this much time on immigration, undoing each of these changes. Not only is it just a reality that we have a lot of other priorities center front for the US government, but also Democrats have not been very active or interested in acting on immigration. They have been very quick to say that they want to undo what President Trump has done, but they haven't really put forward a vision for what that immigration system should look like. So I think that there's just a lack of willingness there to undo each of these changes. And then also, a lot of them shouldn't be quickly undone. For example, all of the changes at the southern border, the president really has accomplished a great reduction in the number of unauthorized arrivals at the southern border. If you quickly undid those, you probably would see surging arrivals at the southern border. And the system we had in place before President Trump took office, it was a very, very imperfect system. So ideally, you'd want an administration that not only was willing to invest in undoing Trump's actions, but also who would be thoughtful about it, and implements ideally a better system on the other side. And I don't know, considering all else that's going on in the United States right now with the pandemic, the economic crisis, the public health crisis, the problems with health insurance, the national conversation on racial injustice, it's hard for me to picture a future administration really investing this much in immigration.